now I join a new alliance to guard the Tomb of Space and find within its cold expanse the salvation of my race.
In Greek mythology, Orion was a literal giant and a hunter without peer. After his death, he was placed by Zeus himself among the stars, forming the constellation of Orion. In that tradition, we find the Orion-class destroyer, the largest capital ship in the galactic Terran Alliance fleet, coming in at an utterly stunning length of 2.1 kilometers. The mere cost of building one of these cavernous behemoths drastically eclipses the cost of the crew's total salaries aboard an Orion for at least 3 years. The exact year of their commission is not known, but they were key assets for the GTA during the Terran-Vasudan War, which unfortunately has few records documenting it. What is known is the fact that very few were lost during the course of the war, but when an Orion did fall in battle, it was considered to be a massive defeat. Though given the cost of one, it's not hard to understand why. Regardless, they were held high as symbols of the unending might of the human race in the galactic Terran Alliance. It has been said that wherever an Orion wanders, war is certain to follow. Due to this perception, the GTA maintained a strict policy about not deploying these destroyers in any system deemed safe, due to the effect on morale that having an Orion nearby has on a system's populace. While having an Orion temporarily stay in a populated system generates feelings of safety and goodwill, having them in-system on extended tours of duty has the exact opposite effect, eliciting feelings of fear among the civilians. Presumably due to the aforementioned notion that if an Orion was in system, that meant that trouble was brewing close by. The Shivan War only solidified this notion. But before the Shivans, the Orions were often seen in combat against humanity's first adversary, the Vasudans, a desert-faring bipedal species hailing from the world of Vasuda Prime. The Terrans and Vasudans had spent 14 years before the arrival of the Shivans fighting each other in the Terran-Vasudan War. Details are, again, sparse about this period of time, but it can be assumed that the GTD Orions could stand up to the Vasudans' own equivalent destroyer, the PVD Typhon class. That's because the Orion had 5 huge, for lack of a better term, laser turrets, and 11 regular laser turrets. But due to the nature of space combat and the need for force projection, the Orions also depend on their healthy strike craft complement of fighters and bombers, which could range anywhere from 96 to 120. Its maximum velocity topped out at 15 meters per second, along with an almost impregnable hull that only concentrated mass fire could penetrate. From the start of the Shivan War up until the invasion of Deneb, the Orion destroyers seemingly avoided most direct contact with the Shivans. However, the one known battle between the Terran Third Fleet and the Shivans during this time resulted in the destruction of the GTD Amadeus. Her death, although tragic, perhaps served to emphasize that neither the Terrans or the Vasudans had the power to combat the Shivans alone, as not long after the two races entered into a ceasefire agreement and openly declared war on their newfound nemesis. Between the first 2 months of 2335, the new Terran-Vasudan alliance were unable to halt the progress of the Shivan menace. Victories were minor, and attempts to understand their enemy were met with limited success. Eventually, by the end of February 2335, the main Shivan fleet had found a way to bypass the Vasudan and Terran blockades entirely by subspace, and had emerged into the Deneb system. Deneb was important as it was only one jump away from the Vasuda system, which Terran analysts believed to be the intended target for the Shivans, who were rallying their forces before committing to the assault on the Vasudan home system. If Vasuda Prime was to have any chance at survival, then the Shivan fleet had to be broken at Deneb. One of the ships leading the Terran effort to attack the system was the GTD Galatae, her elite pilots having made significant inroads into combating the Shivan threat, with their crowning achievement at this time being the destruction of the Shivan destroyer Eva. But as their fighter wings were attacking the Eva, the Shivans took advantage of the Galatae's lack of fighter cover and launched an attack on the destroyer. Barely able to hold them off, the Galatae struggled to keep herself in one piece. But fortunately, their fighter and bomber wings had returned in time to defend their home, and for a very brief period of time, it looked like the Terrans had won the day. That's when the SD Lucifer jumped in. The Lucifer was the biggest and most powerful destroyer in the Shivan fleet. It was practically invincible due to its advanced energy shielding systems, and its 2 beam-firing flux cannons quite literally could cut through the armor of the heaviest defender. Its deployment against the Galatae directly could only mean one thing: the Shivans were done playing around. In a continuous barrage of super powerful energy beams gutting and impaling the Galatae like a stuck pig, the Lucifer quickly undid the work of the Terran defenders in a matter of seconds, and the Galatae was lost. The war would continue over the course of March 2335, with ground steadily being lost until finally the Lucifer was at Earth's doorstep, ready to annihilate the Terran homeworld much like they did to Vasuda Prime. But thankfully, a last-minute vulnerability was discovered and a desperate attack was launched, annihilating the super destroyer just as it was entering the Sol system. After the Great War and the dissolution of the Galactic Terran Alliance, the Terran Power Blocks, and later the Galactic Terran Vasudan Alliance, would look at the lessons the Shivans taught them so brutally. The Orion, once held up as the pinnacle of Terran power and might in the Great Tomb of Space, was humbled so easily by the Shivans and their super destroyer. Only through sheer luck did the Terrans manage to avoid complete extinction, and no one was under the impression that the Shivans would not return at some point in the future. They had to be ready for when that day came. Scientists and engineers within both races began looking at the Shivan weaponry and had made great strides in their own military sciences, many of which were seen in the new refit of the GTD Orion class in the new galactic landscape. According to the revised technical specifications, the velocity, hull strength, and fighter complements are still the same. The main refits all involved offensive technology. The number of huge Terran turrets were downgraded from 5 to 4, and their regular turrets reduced from 11 down to 3. However, to replace this drastic curtailing of turret armament is a very wide array of beam weaponry. 3 anti-fighter beam ports were added, along with 3 slashing beam ports, and 3 focused beam cannons for anti-capital ship operations. A respectable arsenal that could stand toe-to-toe with almost any other ship in known space, past, present, and hopefully as intended, future. By the time of the GTVA's rise, though, the rebels of the Neo-Terran front were the main users of these upgraded Orions, as the GTVA having begun the process of moving away from the class for its primary force projection needs. There is no complete list of Neo-Terran destroyers that were in service during the Rebellion, but the NTD Uhuru and the NTD Vindicator were of particular note due to their participation in the NTF's mad rush to reach the Gamma Draconis portal at the end of the war. But there was a Neo-Terran Orion, however, that has a story worth expanding on. The last stand of the NTD Repulse. The NTD Repulse was the flagship of Neo-Terran Rear Admiral Koth. What he never suspected was that, during the Epsilon Pegasi campaign, the GTVA had a particularly nasty trap in store for him. The GTC Rampart, and along with 2 fighter wings from the 242nd Suicide Kings, along with 2 bomber wings, would launch an attack on the NTC's Majestic and Refute. The idea was that the GTVA forces would attack the NTF cruisers, while presenting themselves as the smallest possible threat. If they attacked in too great in numbers, then the second phase could not proceed, which involved having the NTF send out a distress call and hopefully lure in the Repulse station nearby. As the GTVA assets were only a cruiser and some strike craft, they could easily be brought to heel through the Orion's superior firepower, at least in the eyes of the NTF. The first stages of the attack proceeded smoothly. The Suicide Kings managed to lure the NTF fighter escort away from the Majestic and Refute with ease, allowing for the bomber wing and the GTC Rampart to begin pounding away on the NTF ships. As expected, the Neo-Terran cruisers began sending out a distress call, which, fortunately, the Repulse did actually answer as was hoped. Quickly jumping into the area of operations with guns and beam weapons at the ready, surely the GTVA forces would regret the day they challenged the rightful cause of the Neo-Terran front. No. In response, GTVA Command initiated the 3rd phase of their plan, the deployment of the GTVA Colossus. The Colossus was, simply put, a Juggernaut. eclipsing the size and power of anything in either the Terran or Vasudan arsenals. She was a collaborative effort between Terran and Vasudan military contractors to create the final solution to any possible future Shivan invasion on their worlds, and having been designed to challenge and defeat the Lucifer itself. And now here she was, ready to put a massive energy beam beat down on the Neo-Terran flagship personally. Upon seeing the Colossus jump in, Admiral Koth was defiant, but whether this was bluster or the words of a true believer of Neo-Terra is not known. After casually gutting the NTD Repulse with its overwhelming beam firepower, the Colossus captain ordered Koth to stand down. Koth, perhaps letting pride dictate his actions, refused to surrender, instead passionately stating that he was fully willing to send him and his crew to hell with the Colossus for the cause of Neo-Terra. He then primed his engines for ramming speed into the Colossus. In the resulting carnage, there were no survivors among the Repulse, and the damage to the Colossus was easily repairable. But the Terrans did not just use Orions in the post-Great War galaxy that they found themselves in, as building a ship around new technological advances is a far superior option than simply bolting them onto an existing space frame and hoping they would work, as was witnessed with the Terran Orions and Vasudan Typhons. A new Terran destroyer was created, the GTD Hecate class. The Hecate capitalized on many of the new technologies of the post-Great War era, although its velocity was not one of them, as it was the same as the Orion class at 15 meters per second. Nor was its armor rating, which was also roughly the same as the Orion. Its length and strikecraft complement were slightly greater, measuring at 2.17 kilometers long and 150 plus strikecraft respectively. But the Hecate's real improvements, at least on paper, came in terms of its offensive capability. They had 5 regular laser turrets and 1 huge turret, pretty subpar by themselves, but they were accompanied by the newest in anti-fighter weaponry, flak cannons. The Hecate sported 6 standard flak cannons, 2 long-range cannons, and 2 designated as heavy flak. Then there were the beam weapons, 6 anti-fighter beam cannons, 4 slashing-type beam weapons, and 1 heavy beam cannon made directly for fighting capital ships. The most well-known Hecate is the GTD Aquitane, flagship of the Terran 3rd Fleet based in Capella, perhaps due to the class's greater emphasis on force projection via fighter-bomber operations and less on direct anti-capital ship warfare. The Aquitane did not typically enter the field of engagement directly. However, her pilots took part in a wide range of operations across both the NTF and Great Nebula theaters of war. Some of their exploits involved taking part in the first exploratory missions within the Nebula, the holding of the Knossos subspace gateway against the bulk of the Neo-Terran front, and the defense of the GTD Bastion as it made its final journey as a fire ship to seal the Capella Epsilon Pegasi node to trap the Shivans in Capella. There is one ship that fought directly with both the Shivans and the Neo-Terran front fleets, though it was not exclusively Terran, and technically it was not classified as a destroyer. But to not talk about it at all would be a crime of almost colossal proportions. See what I did there? The ship in question for our final section is none other than the GTVA Colossus. The Colossus was designed in collaboration with both Terran and Vasudan defense companies to be the bulwark against which a potential Shivan invasion would be stopped dead in its tracks. The Colossus, true to its name, measured at over 6.17 kilometers long, a speed of 25 meters per second, and a strikecraft complement of up to 240 fighters and bombers. A crew of over 30,000 was needed to maintain operations aboard this gargantuan capital ship. As for its armaments, well, they were designed to fight and defeat the once invincible SD Lucifer in the Great War, the same Shivan destroyer that glassed Vasuda Prime and ran through both Terran and Vasudan navies as if they were tissue paper. To that end, she was equipped with 18 laser turrets, both huge and standard, 12 flak guns, 10 missile batteries, 10 anti-fighter beam cannons, 7 slashing-type beam cannons, and 6 focused big green beam cannons. Admiral Koth's last stand has already been covered in depth, But what wasn't mentioned was that the Galactic Terran Vasudan Alliance was actually losing the war up until the Colossus' debut at the Battle of NF Station shortly before the attack against the NTD Repulse. From there, the Colossus would move on to the Polaris system, utterly crushing another NTF Orion destroyer and a cruiser. With the Colossus leading the way, GTVA forces across the NTF theater of war began to advance on rebel positions, eventually forcing their leader, Admiral Aiken Bosch, to attempt to flee to the Gamma Draconis system and access the subspace portal leading into the recently discovered Great Nebula to escape. Despite the valiant efforts of the Colossus and the GTVA forces, Bosch was able to slip from their grasp. But at this point, the Neo-Terran front was effectively decimated. The war was over. One ship, one Juggernaut, managed to turn the tide of a war that just 36 hours prior to its official deployment was almost certainly to end in a victory for the Neo-Terran front. That in itself was a testament to the Colossus's power to redirect the fortunes of an entire war to the GTVA's favor. Unfortunately, her participation in the Second Shivan War produced more mixed results. With the NTF crushed, the Colossus found herself reassigned to the Shivan Theater, where her power would be desperately needed. As at this point in time, Allied forces had discovered the Sathanis, a Shivan juggernaut that eclipsed the power and capability of the Lucifer and anything else that was placed against it in the GTVA arsenal. And now, this behemoth was on a direct course for the populated worlds of the GTVA. Their only conceivable hope now was the Colossus. As it came out of the Gamma Draconis portal, brushing through the GTVA blockade and emerging into the Capella system, the Sathanis found an eager Colossus willing to engage in a straight-up fight with its Shivan equivalent. A prior operation by Vasudan bombers had effectively disabled a number of its forward beam cannons. But no mistake could be made. This was to be a battle between two heavyweight Goliaths. Powerful energy beams flew from the Colossus and the Sathanis like angry gods attempting to dethrone one another from their seat amongst the heavens. Cries for more firepower from Terran command, followed by reports of exhausted reactors and overheating beam cannons by the Colossus captain flooded the comms. But eventually the Sathanis succumbed to the GTVA's firepower, with its Death Pyre temporarily forming a new star in the Capella system. And that was that. In one battle, the GTVA had proven their superiority over the formerly unfathomable nemesis of both the Terran and Vasudan peoples, boldly charging in to explore the nebula they rightfully claimed from their enemy. It wasn't long before they found a second Sathanis. Multiple Sathanises were spotted shortly after, all heading to the Gamma Draconis system. What followed was a total withdrawal from the nebula and the Shivan swarming Gamma Draconis, which was soon followed by the invasion of the neighboring Capella system. Hasty preparations for evacuation of the populated worlds followed as the Colossus was sent from one Shivan-made brushfire to another, never tiring despite the thousands of wounds the Shivans inflicted on her hull that would have ended a lesser ship. In the last days of the Second Shivan War, the Colossus and a number of GTVA ships were to make a stand at the Capella Gamma Draconis node. Their mission was to run interference for the Allied forces en route to destroy the subspace node leading to the nearby Epsilon Pegasi system, which would be the first step in the plan to trap the Shivans in Capella by separating the system from the subspace network. To facilitate this, it was believed by Terran command that if they massed a large number of Allied forces in one area, it would be too tempting a target for the Shivans, and they would redirect their forces from other fronts accordingly, which in turn would allow for the group heading to the Epsilon Pegasi node to slip by easily and perform their work. This operation was critical. Sealing the Capella system was the only hope for the Terrans and Vasudans now, as the GTVA would not stand a chance against the Shivan fleet of Juggernauts. Wave upon wave of Shivan aggressors attacked the Allied position, but dogged perseverance was winning the day, even when the Shivan sent in one of their own destroyers to put an end to the nuisance at the node. The Colossus brought her down with the full weight of her firepower. But then, as Sathanis jumped into the area of operations, the Colossus had no chance. Still not fully repaired from her first battle with the Sathanis, and the constant non-stop battles in Capella, she was in less than prime condition to take on a fresh Shivan juggernaut. But despite the odds, her command staff refused to retreat, in the hopes of buying more time to seal the Capellan subspace nodes they were running interference for. Unfortunately though, in a dramatically short amount of time, the Colossus fell to the Shivan beam weapons, and died in an explosive pyre fitting for only the greatest of heroes. Eventually, the Second Shivan War would come to an end with the sealing of Capella from the subspace network, and the baffling actions of the Shivans resulting in the Capellan sun going supernova. At this point, the future is murky and unclear. What new dangers and threats will await humanity in the Vesudans? No being in the universe can answer that question, but what is known is that space has proven time and again how hostile it can be, and there will always be a need for the destroyers, those towering defenders to safeguard humanity and their dominion amongst the stars.